The story begins on a warm August evening in 2003, when 26-year-old Lena Hartley left her small apartment in Riverside, California, after finishing a long shift at a local craft store. She was the kind of person people remembered instantly, soft-spoken, hard-working, always willing to help anyone who needed her. Friends said she carried a calm energy, like someone who made any room feel safer. That night, she stepped outside into the fading light, the sky turning deep orange, the heat still clinging to the air. She locked her door, walked to her old silver sedan, and drove off toward a friend's house where she planned to drop off a box of handmade decor she had created for a baby shower. But Lena never arrived. The next morning, when her car was still not seen at her apartment parking lot, her friend grew uneasy. She tried calling Lena again and again, but there was no answer. The messages never delivered. The friend finally went to Lena's apartment, knocked on the door, waited, then realized something felt terribly off. Lena was not someone who disappeared. She did not change plans without telling anyone. She lived a steady, thoughtful life. And so, by noon, her friend drove to the police station and filed a missing person report, praying she was overreacting. When officers began asking questions, the answers only made the situation feel worse. Lena had no arguments with anyone. She had no history of running away, no reason to vanish. She was close with her family, and she was someone who followed routines. Officers immediately treated the case as high risk and started checking the roads between her apartment and the place she was supposed to visit. By late afternoon, a patrol unit found Lena's car parked on a quiet side road near a stretch of trees that lined a small, worn walking trail. The car door was slightly ajar, but there were no signs of forced entry, and the ground around it looked undisturbed inside the car. Her phone was missing, but her purse lay in the passenger seat. Her wallet was still inside, with cash untouched. The keys were in the ignition. Nothing pointed to robbery. Nothing pointed to an argument. Everything pointed to something unexpected, something fast, something frightening. Detectives arrived and taped off the area. Search teams walked through the nearby trail, calling Lena's name, listening for anything that might guide them. But the trail was silent. Dogs were brought in, but the scent seemed to fade quickly. It was as if Lena had stepped into thin air. The community reacted instantly. Flyers with her photo appeared on shop windows, bus stops, and car windshields. Her co-workers organized search groups. Cars moved slowly through the neighborhoods, with people looking out their windows. But as hours turned to days, and days turned to a week, hope grew heavier. Everyone waited for something, any clue, any item, any sign that could show where she had gone. The break came 9 days later, when a hiker on a nearby trail noticed something unusual near a dry creek bed. A pair of sandals. They looked clean, out of place, as if someone had set them down carefully. The hiker called the police instantly. Within an hour, the area was filled with officers, and soon they found Lena. The discovery shook the investigators who had been working non-stop. The location was hidden but not unreachable. A place close enough to where her car had been found that it made sense, but far enough that someone unfamiliar with the area would not place her there. The medical examiner began the process of determining what had happened, and detectives closed in around the possibility of foul play. It didn't take long before the case was officially treated as homicide. In those first days after finding her, the investigation moved fast. Detectives gathered every possible piece of physical evidence. They interviewed people living in the area. They talked to workers from nearby businesses and traced every step Lena had taken on the day she disappeared. But despite a strong effort, the case began to slow. No one had seen her with anyone suspicious. No surveillance cameras caught her being followed. Every person close to her had a clear alibi. The detectives continued searching for a lead that could tie the scene to someone, but everything returned inconclusive. The small physical traces they collected were preserved carefully and sent to the state lab for testing. Investigators waited, hoping for something clear. But when results came back in late 2003, the samples were too degraded to produce a full DNA profile. Technology at the time could not extract the level of detail needed. What they got was partial, faint, unreliable. Still, detectives kept the case open, knowing that time could change things. But time also brought silence. Months turned into a year. Then 2, then 5. Leads vanished. Calls slowed. People who had once checked in regularly gradually shifted back into their lives. And Lena's case joined the long list of unsolved investigations across California. Cases that sat in folders waiting for a moment when science or luck or persistence would finally push them forward. Her family, however, never stopped searching. They contacted detectives often, even when there was nothing new to share. They held small gatherings each year on the anniversary of her disappearance. They kept her photo on the mantel, framed beside candles that were lit almost every evening. Her mother, especially, refused to accept a world where the truth remained hidden. She believed that one day someone would speak, or a new tool would emerge that could lift something useful from the evidence, stored in a temperature-controlled box in the police vault. She prayed for that day. In 2010, the cold case unit briefly re-evaluated Lena's file. They ran the partial DNA again, hoping new updates to the system might produce a lead, but it still did not match anyone in the state or national database. Again, they placed the evidence back in storage, carefully sealed, waiting for a time when technology would catch up to unanswered questions. By 2015, California had increased its investment in cold case programs, and many departments were encouraged to revisit older files. Lena's case was one of them. Detectives reviewed the evidence one more time, hoping something might now stand out: an overlooked witness, a forgotten detail, a fresh angle. They conducted new interviews, but memories had faded, people had moved away, and nothing meaningful emerged. The DNA sample still remained too, incomplete for a usable comparison. But the story did not end there. In 2022, the State Crime Lab announced that it would begin revisiting thousands of cold case evidence samples using newly enhanced DNA recovery tools. For the first time, incredibly small and degraded samples could be strengthened, rebuilt, and expanded into more complete profiles. Cases once considered impossible to solve were now being pulled back into the light. Detectives from across the state submitted old samples with renewed hope. The file, containing Lena's preserved evidence, was among the first chosen. The crime lab technician who opened the sealed container did so with careful hands. She knew how long families had waited. She knew what these boxes represented: years of heartache, unanswered questions, stories frozen in time. She began processing the small, partial sample that had been useless in 2003 and unreliable in 2010. This time, she used a tool that had not existed back then, one capable of mapping genetic markers in ways older systems could not. Hours turned into days. Tests ran, paused, reran. Small traces grew into clearer patterns. Then something unexpected happened. The technician froze, staring at her screen. She checked the numbers twice. Then again. A full DNA profile had formed, clean, strong, unmistakable. She entered it into the system, holding her breath. A hit came back almost immediately. A name appeared. Someone with a past record. Someone whose DNA had been entered into the system years after. Lena's case went cold. The most unimaginable part was this. The man had been living less than an hour from where Lena disappeared. He had passed by the area multiple times. He had likely walked among people who never suspected him, and for almost 20 years he had remained hidden in plain sight. When the cold case detectives saw the result, the air in the room changed. The quiet confusion that had followed the case for so long suddenly shifted into sharp direction. After decades of silence, the truth had finally begun to surface, and the hunt for Lena's killer had officially started. Detectives moved quickly after the DNA hit. They verified the results multiple times, retracing every step of the lab analysis to ensure there was no mistake. Each confirmation brought more certainty, but also a heavy weight. The man identified by the DNA was Martin Delaney, a 42-year-old mechanic who had lived in Riverside for years. On paper, he appeared ordinary, a quiet man who worked in a small garage, kept to himself, and had no obvious connection to Lena Hartley. But the DNA evidence left no room for doubt. He had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, more perhaps. The right place to commit a terrible crime. Detectives began building a timeline, combing through every known movement of Martin from the day Lena disappeared. They checked employment records, credit card transactions, and social media footprints, interviewing anyone who had interacted with him in the early 2000s. What they found painted a chilling picture. Martin had no alibi for the day Lena vanished. He had been near the area where her car was found and where her body was eventually discovered. Neighbors recalled seeing him leave his apartment unusually early that morning, carrying a large duffel bag. It was all circumstantial, but when paired with the DNA, the evidence became undeniable. The arrest plan was carefully coordinated. Martin lived alone in a modest apartment complex, unaware that investigators had confirmed his link to Lena's murder. Officers arrived early in the morning to prevent any chance of him fleeing. The air was crisp, the city just waking, when detectives knocked on his door. He answered, seemingly calm, as though nothing in his life had changed since 2003. But the calm shattered when detectives informed him of the DNA match. They had his prints, his DNA, and enough to charge him. His face went pale, and the room filled with tension as officers read him his rights and placed him in handcuffs. The community's reaction was immediate and intense. Riverside had not forgotten Lena Hartley, even after nearly 20 years. News of Martin Delaney's arrest spread rapidly, and families who had worried for decades finally had some answers. Lena's mother, Lena Hartley, was flown to the police department as soon as she could be. The moment she saw Martin led away, tears streamed down her face. Relief, sorrow, and anger all collided. She had spent years lighting candles, organizing searches, and praying for justice. And now it had finally arrived, but it was not the joyful reunion she had imagined. It was heavy, raw, and painfully real. During preliminary hearings, Martin remained mostly silent. He refused to answer questions, declining to speak even when given the opportunity. But the prosecution had what they needed. The DNA evidence was irrefutable. The timeline aligned with witnesses who had placed him near critical locations. Items found during a search of his apartment connected him indirectly to Lena's disappearance. Small details, once overlooked in 2003, suddenly took on immense significance. His movements, once a vague shadow in the investigation, now formed a clear chain of events that led to Lena's tragic fate. The trial became a community event. Journalists covered every hearing, neighbors attended in silence, and families who had been affected by cold cases waited anxiously to see if justice could finally be served. Testimonies painted a harrowing story of what had happened on that August evening in 2003. Experts explained the DNA technology that had failed years earlier and how advancements finally produced the match. Detectives recounted their painstaking efforts over decades, the times they returned to old leads, the moments they feared the case would never be solved. Each word in the courtroom reminded everyone that while the past could not be rewritten, truth had a way of catching up. The prosecution focused on showing that Martin had both opportunity and motive, though no robbery or theft was involved. Investigators suggested that he had known Lena through minor, seemingly innocent interactions in the community. Perhaps she had crossed paths with him at a local store or on the streets near her apartment. Small, fleeting moments that might have seemed inconsequential in 2003 now carried weight. Witnesses were called to testify about sightings and inconsistencies in his story at the time. Even neighbors who had been questioned years ago were brought back, sharing memories that initially seemed too faint to matter but now fit into a larger pattern. For the defense, the strategy was minimal. With DNA evidence as strong as it was, there was little room to argue innocence. Instead, they questioned procedures and timing, suggesting the chain of custody could have been compromised, that memories had faded, and that the decades-long delay might have caused inaccuracies. But these arguments fell short. The jury could see the undeniable truth. The technology that had once failed now confirmed what decades of suspicion could not. Martin Delaney had been tied to Lena's murder conclusively. During the trial, emotional moments were unavoidable. Lena Hartley testified about her daughter, describing Lena's laughter, her kindness, and her dedication to others. She spoke about the years of not knowing, the holidays spent missing her, the void left in family celebrations. Tears flowed freely in the courtroom as judges, jurors, and even journalists felt the weight of a family's long, persistent grief. It was a reminder that unsolved cases carry consequences beyond just statistics or reports they affect, real lives in deep and lasting ways. As testimony continued, the prosecution revealed details about Lena's last known movements and how Martin's presence in the area coincided with her disappearance. They reconstructed the timeline meticulously. Lena leaving her apartment, driving toward her friend's house, the abandoned car, and finally, the location where she was found days later. Each point highlighted Martin's proximity and, combined with DNA evidence, created a compelling narrative. The case was no longer just about a missing person, it was about a methodical search for truth, using modern science to illuminate a cold, painful mystery outside the courtroom. The community processed the news differently. Some were shocked that someone who seemed ordinary had been capable of such a crime. Others were relieved that the decades of uncertainty were ending, that Lena's story had not been forgotten. Local schools and community centers held discussions about safety, awareness, and the power of persistence. In Riverside, Lena Hartley's name became a symbol of enduring hope, a reminder that even long-forgotten cases could still find resolution. Families of other cold case victims found encouragement, inspired by the knowledge that breakthroughs could happen even decades later. The final weeks of the trial were tense. Jurors listened carefully to expert testimonies about DNA, recovery techniques that were unavailable in 2003, understanding that what once seemed impossible had now become central to proving guilt. Each day, the emotional toll on both family members and detectives was evident. Many had invested years in the investigation, revisiting details, reanalyzing evidence, and holding on to the hope that justice would eventually arrive. Their dedication underscored the importance of persistence in law enforcement and the enduring impact of modern forensic science. Then, after weeks of careful consideration, the verdict came. The jury deliberated for only a short period before returning with a unanimous decision. Martin Delaney was found guilty of the murder of Lena Hartley. The sentence would come later, but the moment itself was a release of tension, fear, and pain that had lingered for nearly 2 decades. Lena Hartley hugged relatives, tears streaming down her face, feeling a complex mixture of relief and sorrow. Justice had been served, though the loss remained permanent. Lena would never return, but at least the person responsible was finally held accountable. In the aftermath, detectives reflected on the journey. They noted the challenges of cold cases, the frustration of missing leads, and the breakthroughs that modern technology could provide. For them, Lena's case represented both the difficulty and the reward of persistence. Every detail mattered, every piece of evidence preserved had a purpose, and every family's hope deserved respect. They shared publicly that the lesson from this case was to never give up, to continue searching for truth even when the odds seemed insurmountable, and to trust in the evolving tools of forensic science. Meanwhile, the community of Riverside began healing. Friends of Lena organized a memorial at her favorite park, sharing stories of her kindness and strength. Local media highlighted the case as an example of how persistence, modern technology, and community involvement could converge to solve even the oldest mysteries. For many, the story served as a reminder that long-awaited answers were possible, that hope could survive through years of uncertainty, and that the memory of someone lost could inspire lasting change in others' lives. And so, Lena Hartley's story moved from a chapter of sorrow and unanswered questions into one of closure, accountability, and remembrance. The years of waiting, searching, and grieving were not erased, but they became part of a journey that finally led to truth. And even though the pain of losing her would never fully disappear, Riverside could finally breathe again, knowing that justice had caught up, that the long silence had ended, and that Lena's story would never be forgotten. The final stage of Lena Hartley's case focused on closure for the family and the community. Even after the verdict, the Hartleys felt the heavy weight of her absence. Their home still held the echoes of her laughter, her room remained untouched, and photographs captured moments frozen in time. Yet, knowing Martin Delaney would face consequences allowed them a measure of peace. They began small acts of remembrance, lighting candles in her memory and organizing charitable events in her name, focusing on youth and safety awareness. Each gathering, though bittersweet, reminded them that Lena's life had left a lasting imprint, one that extended far beyond her years. Detectives involved in the case reflected on the investigative journey with a mix of relief and solemnity. They had chased leads that spanned nearly 2 decades, revisited old interviews, and reanalyzed physical evidence with tools unavailable in 2003. For them, this case underscored the importance of tenacity and patience. They shared stories of nights spent reviewing reports, mornings retracing Lena's last known steps, and months waiting for technological advancements to provide the breakthrough they desperately needed. It was a testament to the evolving nature of criminal investigations and a reminder that justice, while sometimes delayed, could eventually prevail. Martin Delaney's sentencing brought mixed emotions. In court, the gravity of his actions was laid bare. He had no history of violent crime that the public knew of, but the evidence demonstrated premeditation, an opportunity exploited to tragic effect. The judge emphasized the enduring impact on Lena's family, noting how their lives had been irreversibly altered. The sentence was lengthy, ensuring that he would spend the remainder of his life accountable for what had been taken. For many, including detectives and community members, the sentence symbolized the culmination of a long journey toward justice. It was not merely a punishment, but recognition of the lives affected and the resilience of those who refused to give up. Meanwhile, Riverside began to heal in tangible ways. Local organizations started programs focused on missing persons awareness, encouraging residents to report suspicious activity and maintain vigilance. The media coverage of Lena's case prompted conversations about safety and the importance of preserving evidence, even in cases that seemed hopeless. School programs highlighted Lena's story as a lesson in persistence and community responsibility. Parents, educators, and children alike began to understand that small actions could prevent tragedies, that the search for truth could be relentless, and that patience could ultimately yield results. The Hartleys also found support through connections with other families who had endured long periods of uncertainty. They joined advocacy groups, participated in conferences about cold cases, and shared their experiences publicly. Their voices became a source of guidance for others navigating similar pain. By telling Lena's story, they helped humanize statistics, emphasizing that every case represented a person, a family, and a network of relationships deeply affected by loss. Their courage inspired other families to persist in seeking answers, reinforcing the idea that justice could arrive, even after years of silence. As the years passed, Lena's legacy became more than her tragedy. Her name was associated with awareness campaigns, safety initiatives, and community programs. Riverside began commemorating the day of her disappearance as a day of reflection and action, encouraging residents to honor those lost to unresolved crimes and to support families still waiting for answers. Monuments and plaques were placed in parks and community centers, not only as a remembrance of Lena Hartley, but as symbols of hope, resilience, and the enduring pursuit of justice. Visitors often paused to reflect on the narrative of loss transformed into advocacy. Finding inspiration in her story, the detective team continued to use the Lena Hartley case as a model for future investigations. It demonstrated the importance of revisiting cold cases with fresh eyes, leveraging new technologies, and maintaining meticulous records. Training sessions emphasized lessons learned, the significance of initial evidence collection, the potential of modern DNA analysis, and the emotional intelligence required to handle families' prolonged grief. The case served as a blueprint, showing that no lead was too small, no witness too insignificant, and no amount of time too long to delay action. For the department, it reinforced the idea that dedication and innovation could overcome decades of stagnation. Public response evolved into broader support for law enforcement and forensic programs. Community members contributed to funding initiatives for advanced laboratories, educational scholarships, and public safety campaigns. Lena's story became a catalyst for change, demonstrating how one case could inspire systemic improvements and encourage collaboration between police, civilians, and forensic experts. Her memory influenced a generation of young investigators and community leaders, motivating them to act diligently and compassionately in the face of unresolved crimes. Her story was no longer just about loss. It was about legacy and progress. At home, the Hartleys found moments of quiet reflection. They revisited old photo albums, spoke of Lena's dreams, and celebrated anniversaries with remembrance in mind. Their sorrow persisted, but it was tempered by a sense of justice served and recognition that the system, despite delays, had finally acknowledged their suffering. Each year, they honored Lena with private ceremonies, remembering the child, the young woman, and the impact she had on everyone who knew her. Her story became a personal and public reminder of resilience, and through these acts, they maintained a connection to the daughter they had lost, but whose memory continued to shape their lives. The broader implications of the case were also felt in educational and legal spheres. Universities used the Lena Hartley investigation as a case study in criminal justice courses, emphasizing how technology could transform investigations and how methodical record-keeping was critical in cold cases. Legal experts highlighted the trial as a demonstration of how DNA evidence could decisively influence outcomes, even after decades. Forensic seminars often referenced Lena's case, showing students the importance of patience, diligence, and innovative thinking. Across multiple domains, her story became a teaching tool, extending the reach of her memory and reinforcing the principle that truth can endure and prevail. As Riverside moved forward, Lena Hartley's name became synonymous with hope for families affected by cold cases. Her story provided solace, inspiration, and a blueprint for achieving closure after years of uncertainty. Families began to share their experiences more openly, encouraged by the knowledge that perseverance, careful investigation, and modern science could transform despair into resolution. Lena's legacy transcended the tragedy of her death, becoming a guiding example of how communities, families, and investigators could unite to confront unresolved crimes with courage and determination. In conclusion, the resolution of Lena Hartley's case marked more than the apprehension of a criminal. It was a testament to enduring hope, meticulous detective work, and the power of modern forensic science. The Hartleys found partial peace. The detectives celebrated the closure of a case long thought unsolvable, and Riverside as a whole learned the value of persistence, remembrance, and advocacy. Lena's life, though tragically cut short, became a symbol of the strength that can emerge from loss and the transformative impact one case can have on countless lives. Her story would not be forgotten, her memory would continue to inspire, and her legacy would endure as a beacon for justice and resilience in the years to come.